Perfect.
Tips for gamers, welcome in, guys. We are going to be going over the college football playoff rankings. They just were released. We got Coach with us. Welcome in, Coach.
Thanks for having me.
We got Tug with us as well. Welcome, Tug.
Well, welcome to you too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so at number one, we got Georgia. None of us disagree with that. I don't see any disagreements there with us. We'll move on from there. We'll go to Alabama. Now, Coach, do you think Alabama should have been ranked number 2?
No, not exactly. But here's the challenge. If you look at who Georgia played, who Alabama played, even Michigan State, strength of schedule for everybody seems to be down a little bit with regards to these teams. You know, if you were going to put an 8-0 team in there like Michigan State, I feel that you should have just gone ahead and put them all the way up to number 3.
2.
I'm sorry, yeah, number 2, and let it play out that way.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
go ahead.
I agree with that. You know, I think it's something that's, you know, yeah, they played. I mean, they got Miami. They played Miami. They scheduled them. They were in outer conference. Scheduled them 13-44. Miami is not currently ranked. We found out that the team is not good at all. Then they scheduled Mercer. Okay, they beat the snot out of Mercer. There you go. Florida, they almost lost to, and they played at Florida, which Georgia just went to Florida as well last week, and Florida just, they slapped them up like nothing. Basically took away anything that was left of Florida is now gone, and they're just done. And then they played Southern Miss, beat them up. And they played Mississippi, beat up Mississippi. Texas A&M won against them, and they were unranked at the time. And so, you know, in Tennessee, the score is 52-24, but in reality, us watching that game was a lot closer than what the score shows. Alabama didn't truly lead until the fourth quarter. I mean, it really just wasn't a dominant performance by Alabama. So, you know, putting them above an undefeated Michigan State is kind of hard for me to swallow on that. It really is. What about you, Tug? What do you think?
I have absolutely no arguments here. If you're talking about strength of schedule and who looked better, Michigan State has that on Alabama. I don't understand why they're putting them at number 2. You can't make that argument that Alabama's Alabama. Well, that argument's gone, because if Alabama was Alabama, they wouldn't almost lose to Florida. They wouldn't lose to Texas A&M. This year's been a little strange with football in general.
Yeah, it has. It definitely has. And I think, Michigan State, we can kind of compare those two. They're ranked 3rd, and I think it's amazing because they gave Michigan State credit. I really do. I think they gave them credit. And there's no way in heck that I would put Cincinnati above Michigan State. I know the AP polls had that. To me, that's hogwash. Michigan State, and we'll just go over their schedule real quick and then talk about, you guys think they should be above Alabama. You would both agree with that? If you're going to put an undefeated team up like that, you guys think that they should be up above them?
What was the score of Alabama's Miami game?
It was absolutely atrocious. 44-13 is what it was.
Okay.
And it was at
Michigan
Miami.
State, yeah, it was at Miami. Michigan State traveled down to Miami and beat them 38-17.
Yeah.
So comparable score.
Yeah, and it was at Miami, so that is a great comparison there. To me, my opinion, I would put Michigan State above Alabama. I would put them at number 2. If you were willing in the AP polls to put Cincinnati at number 2 for the longest time, how in the heck would you not put, especially when you brought that up, them going to Miami, playing Miami and beating them 38-17, basically the same score at the same place, and they're undefeated, and in a huge game against Michigan. How often do they beat Michigan? And I mean, did you know the running back got 5 TDs, 197 yards? I mean, that's just insane. That Walker kid, he's a beast. He's an absolute beast. So Michigan right now, but Michigan has coming up. They got Purdue. Purdue's a scary team. That is a terrifying team to play when you're ranked, because you got to play at Purdue. That team can beat you. They can play way better at times than they should. Then they play the Terps. Then they got to go play at the Shoe, Ohio State. So that's going to be a big one for them. And then they ended off with Penn State. So Michigan State's remaining schedule's tougher than hell. It's not going to be easy for them. So I think we can agree with that. Now go ahead.
Yeah, wait a minute. Here's a big here's a thing to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Both Alabama and Michigan State scheduled. Alabama scheduled Mercer,
Mm-hmm.
and then some other horrible team in the beginning. And so did Michigan State. I mean, they have Youngstown State that they scheduled in there.
Yeah.
And then you have what was the other team that they Western Kentucky that they scheduled. So there's matchup with some pretty weak teams that both Alabama and Michigan State scheduled. The difference is,
well, they got New Mexico State too, though. Alabama.
Yeah, but at the end, and that hasn't been played yet. Which will be the third horrible team that Alabama, and just after that week, they should drop for scheduling that team at that time, because Michigan State's looking at having to play all Big Ten teams: Purdue, Maryland, OSU, and PSU, Penn State. And but going back, Michigan State won all their games.
Yeah.
And their marquee win is versus Michigan, which is a top 10 ranked team today.
Mm-hmm.
Not last week, not last month, today.
Yeah. Not in the beginning.
Alabama's on the fictitious rankings of the beginning of the year. We all know Miami is not a good team, and there's no ranking there. So just because they were artificially set up in the beginning of the year, to me, means nothing. What are they today? What do we know today? They're not a good football team. So neither Michigan State nor Alabama get credit for beating a good football team.
No, and they beat them. They beat them really close to the same amount. So if you're comparing apples to apples at this point in time, I think the point is they beat, like what you're going into. They beat Michigan, who's ranked today, and they also, comparatively, they beat Florida or Miami. In Florida, they beat them about the same score. So if you're looking at it and going, okay, they both chose some crappy schools here and there that, I don't want to call them crappy schools, but they're just not as talented of schools. I really do. I think Michigan State deserves to be above Alabama. But in all realness, I see them doing this because they're probably trying to protect Georgia. Now, there's no evidence of this. You don't know it. They're just picking guys. And that's just it. But if they put Alabama at 4 and Georgia loses to Alabama, would that knock Georgia out? Based on the rankings. Any other team at any other time of the year, that would knock a team out of the top 4. Usually you'd go at 5 or 6, maybe.
But not traditionally. You're talking about Georgia losing to Alabama?
Yeah, I'm saying if Georgia was 4 and Alabama goes in and beats them in the championship, would that knock them out to where Georgia wouldn't go into the playoffs if they were ranked 4?
Yeah.
So then, but see, it's kind of tough because if that's the case, then...
But Georgia's ranked 1 and Alabama's ranked 2, so I'm confused on that.
But what I'm saying is if they ranked Alabama where they truly should be ranked, because I don't think I think majority of people, and I can't really talk for the majority of people, but I think that Alabama's not ranked 2, period. I just don't think they're ranked 2. I don't think they're deserved. Yeah, they're a talented team. Oh, yeah, we can all agree with that. But I don't think that they were good enough this year to be ranked number 2. I just don't see it. I think Michigan State earns that right. I think you can even maybe argue for Oregon at this point in time. But if you put Alabama at 4, which I would put them at, and Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC championship, would that knock Georgia out? Or would that keep Georgia in? Because no matter what, I think Georgia needs to be kept in at this point. If they take one loss at this point, they should be kept in, period.
Yeah, Georgia's going to stay in if the only team they lose to is Alabama.
Yeah.
They'll stay in, and that'll force the issue that Alabama gets in. because
Yeah.
they beat the number one team. They showed up in the championship when they needed to and stuff of that nature.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
I think Georgia, even if they lose to Alabama, Georgia will still be number one overall. They won't move them down to number two or whatever they would do. I think they would keep them at number one. But it all depends on what these other teams do, like Michigan State. Let's say they win out, then they'll put Michigan State at number one because they'll be undefeated. But if Michigan State does lose, then Georgia will stay number one no matter what.
Yeah, if we're talking all one loss teams, then at this point in time, then they're going to just argue, who's the best of the one loss teams. But yeah, and I'm just saying the only reason I brought that up is just because I think that, I don't know if they're favoring Alabama here. I don't know what it is. I highly disagree with it. I don't think Alabama deserves the respect at number two. That just is absurd to me. But I was thinking the only reason I brought it up is I was thinking that they were trying to protect maybe Georgia in the rankings, even though that's probably it wouldn't happen. Even if Alabama was fourth and they lost, they'd still keep them in. If they were fourth and they beat Georgia, they'd still keep Georgia in. At that point, I mean, you have to. You just have to. You got to keep Georgia in if they only get one loss. And at this point in time, I think even if Georgia loses to, any one of these schools, unless they lose to like the really terrible school that they're playing, I forget who they're playing. That's pretty bad. But if they lose to them, then yeah, you'd have to maybe look at it a little bit tighter. But even still, give them the top four. But moving on here to Oregon. So Oregon is at number 4. Now, Oregon did lose one game against Stanford, and Stanford is one of those weird teams. You don't really know who they're playing, but obviously, as we all know, they beat Ohio State at the shoe. Now, that's a huge accomplishment, and I know their defense in Ohio State was just terrible with Kerry Combs at that time, and then they, adjusted since then, and Ohio State's defense has done tremendously better since then. Even in the Penn State game, I have to say, they did really well against Penn State of stopping them from the huge, huge gains. Penn State was not getting them for anything big. But aside from that, Oregon beat them. And after that, they played Stony Brook. And I actually like this. I like Oregon at number 4. I think it kind of rattles things up. They're giving respect to them for beating Ohio State. And they're giving respect to the Big Ten here. What do you guys feel about the number 4 Oregon? Coach, I'll go with you first, and then Tug will hit you up on this. What do you think?
I'm fine with that. It'll play itself out on this one because, and here's the situation. Here's where the Pac-12, Oregon need to be rewarded. They had their 2 easy teams. They played Fresno, the Fresno State Bulldogs. And, I'm taking a quick look at Fresno here. They're a 7-2 football team. They lost to Oregon and Hawaii. And they beat a 21 ranked San Diego State. So Fresno is actually no pushover.
No.
That's actually a pretty good football team. And you go back, and from here on out, they're playing 9 conference games. And besides Stony Brook, 1 easy team, and they went to the shoe. They absolutely deserve, based upon their willingness to schedule OSU, go to OSU.
Yeah.
Schedule Fresno State, that's a good football team. Only 1 cupcake on their schedule.
Stony Brook.
Only 1.
Yeah.
They deserve to be ranked higher than Alabama, looking at their schedule.
I would agree with that. I mean, if you were to put Alabama where you guys would, where would you put them? I'd put them at 4. That's my thing. Coach, where would you put them?
4.
Tug?
Maybe.
Yeah, I would put them at 4 as well.
Okay. I think we're all in agreement on that. I think Oregon, it would, if it was ours, it would go Georgia, Michigan State, Oregon. And then would you put Alabama, though, above Ohio State?
Alabama above Ohio State. It depends on when. When are we talking?
Right now.
Oh, that's tough. Ohio State still has some things to prove a little bit, No, I think Ohio State stays at 5. Alabama goes to 4.
Interesting. Coach,
I'm sorry. I'm actually going to change that just because I'm thinking about their scheduling, and the fact that Alabama lost to Texas A&M and almost lost to Florida, and both. I don't think that Alabama should actually be ranked above Ohio State. I think Ohio State should be ranked at least 4, and then put Alabama at 5.
I actually agree with you, and here's why I agree with you on that so much. It did nothing for Alabama for Georgia to go in and whip the living piss out of Florida. It didn't do it. It did the exact opposite of helping them, because what Alabama needed was for that to be a close game, and that was not even somewhat close. It just wasn't even somewhat close. So I think that hurt Alabama. You had a tough game against Tennessee. Okay, and they'll try to say, here's the thing about Ohio State. Ohio State, where was Ohio State's really tough games here? The Tulsa one, kind of, that was a little bit ridiculous. Aside from that, but it was 20-41, so it wasn't even really that close. And Tulsa's not terrible, but they're not great. They almost beat Oklahoma. But then you look at it, 59-7, Akron. Okay, that's a cupcake. One right there. Rutgers, Big Ten school. They were not a horrible record, 52-13. Then the Terps, 17-66. And then Indiana. Indiana goes in and Ohio State goes into Indiana, just whips the living crap out of them, besides the first drive. And then you got the Penn State game. But Ohio State could have put up 100 points on almost any one of those schools. I mean, the only reason
they were playing, they were subbing in.
Yeah, they were subbing in third stringers, fourth stringers by third quarter.
Well, here, take the first 4 teams. The first 4 teams that Alabama played, Miami. I don't care what their ranking was back then. It's throwing darts at a board.
Yeah.
There's until you played them. What have they put on the field that we know at this moment in time? Miami is not a good football team.
Yep.
Then they played Mercer.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we know that Mercer's not a Power 5 conference football team.
No. Southern Miss.
Then they played Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Florida is not a good football team.
No.
And
they're good. I think they're good, but I don't think they're as good as what people had them as. And I really do think that they just.
Oh yeah, because they're gone. They have a 4-4 record. And they're gone.
They're not the same Florida what we've known previously.
Yeah, they're 2-4 in conference. And they're 4-4 overall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the normal Florida that we know of. They're just not good this year.
Yeah.
And then University of Southern Mississippi. Okay, there you go, Alabama. Really scheduled some hard teams. Their first 4 games they stacked a lot of points and a lot of everything. Hey, run Bryce Young for Heisman, all the rest are against 4 horrible teams.
Yeah, well,
4 terrible teams.
Yeah,
Ole Miss was the first game they had, and they played well against Ole Miss.
Mississippi wasn't too terrible. Texas A&M was not really like Texas A&M. They struggled against CU, and people will say that, they didn't have their quarterback at that time. I don't care if you didn't have your quarterback at CU, and it was 10-7. It's just there's
and was Texas A&M wasn't ranked when they played Alabama, right?
No, they weren't.
No.
Oh, okay, and Oregon was ranked what?
The entire
7.
Time.
They were ranked 7 when Ohio State played?
Nope, 12.
12. Okay. And now they're number 4. Yeah, I'm sorry. You can't justify Alabama being at number 2 at this point. You can't.
No, I agree, Tug. Not with their schedule that they played. The first 4 games they played were I could care less what they were ranked at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
What those teams truly are that we've know by their record
mm-hmm.
and their scores, they're not that good. And Ole Miss is good. That's a good victory for Alabama. The loss against Texas A&M, like you said, Tug, now Texas A&M has gotten better, so they're not a bad team,
No.
and they beat them. That's the point here. Texas A&M is not a bad team, and they beat them. And then Mississippi State's same record as Ole Miss, 3-2 in the conference, and they're even worse though. They're a 5-3, and so they beat them. And then Tennessee, they're a 2-3 conference team and a 4-4 overall. So they've only.
And in Tennessee, the thing is if Tennessee played Oregon, I don't see Tennessee winning against Oregon. I don't see that happening. And so if you kind of compare the two, it was a close game there. Ohio, it's not like Oregon too just got crushed after they beat Ohio State. They've done decently well. They had some tight games. UCLA, they won that by the hair of their chins at the end there. California, 17-24. And then they lost. They had a little bit of a rough patch. Then they beat CU 29-52. But Oregon's winning. They're winning football games, and they're winning against their conference, and they went out and scheduled a tough opponent in OSU. But that's why I agree with you. I think OSU's up there. But going on here, I think Oregon really deserves to be up there. You beat Ohio State, and you need to get that respect. And putting them above Ohio State, I think it's brilliant. But I also think, too, for Oregon here, now listen to the rest of their schedule here. You got Washington coming up, and they have to play at Washington. Okay, that could be, an interesting game there to a slight degree. I don't really know how much Washington has done, but then they have Washington State, then they have Utah, then they have Oregon State. They have, their rival in Oregon State. So as it looks right now from that schedule, it looks like Oregon has a very good chance of making it to the playoffs. Very solid chance. I don't see Oregon dropping out of this. Do you guys? I mean, with Washington State, Utah, and then Oregon State coming up?
No,
they shouldn't.
It looks like they will end up playing Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. And Utah's a good football team. Even though they're overall 5-3. Utah's
they can score some points on you, and they can do well. But I see it as right now, I see that they could walk in and Utah played USC and beat the living snot out of them. They beat them 42-26. Arizona State. What's interesting is UCLA, that actually came really close to beating Oregon. They beat them 44-24.
44-24.
So, Utah's not an easy school by any means, but it still looks like if Oregon's really that good, Oregon's going to slug match. They should end up making it in here. I think Oregon.
Yeah, I see the easy, not easy, but it's they just have to win, and they don't have a Michigan. They don't have a
Michigan
really
State
top team that they have to go through.
I see them walking through this.
Out of the Big Ten teams and out of the SEC teams and the Pac-12 teams, Oregon has the easiest path to land itself.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question. Is history going to repeat itself? Are we going to be looking at another 2014 BCS when the first BCS championship was Ohio State Oregon? I'm sorry, 2015. No, it's 2014. Yeah, that would actually be pretty interesting.
Yeah, you may see that, but they would have to be because then what would here's the thing: if Ohio State beats Michigan State, they would probably launch up above Oregon. So then Oregon would end up playing Georgia, and then Ohio State would play Alabama.
And that's not the big match that everyone's talking about. The big match is Ohio State's offense versus Georgia's defense. So I think that's what everyone wants to see. So if it is Oregon versus Ohio State, that's going to be pretty interesting too, because Oregon did beat Ohio State. So It'll be pretty interesting.
That would be super
guys.
interesting.
It will be. All right, guys. Let's go back in a second here, because I've had this underlying feeling that Georgia got way too much credit for beating Clemson,
Without a doubt.
and nobody really knew it at the time. And there was like, wow, shock and awe. My goodness, they beat the number 3 team. They're unbelievable. But if you look at Georgia's schedule,
yeah, UAB.
it's exactly like what I'm talking about with Alabama's.
Yeah,
Vanderbilt. They beat a horrible Clemson team.
And
they go and play University of Alabama Birmingham, a top-notch school at all accounts, right? No. Then they go play SC, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Terrible football team. Then they go up against one of the best teams in the SEC. Oh, maybe not. Vandy. Then they go up against the next worst team in the SEC, Arkansas. They do get a win over Auburn.
Yep, tough one.
And then we all look at University of Kentucky as, well, guess what? University of Kentucky, I guarantee you I haven't looked at their schedule, but they haven't played that many quality teams.
Kentucky was
an inflated record.
An interesting team. They're interesting. I wouldn't go much more than the fact that, okay, that's an interesting team. But I do agree with you they got Charleston, whatever the hell, coming up. And then Georgia Tech. They got a cakewalk basically at the end of this.
They have they have the easiest schedule of every team that's played. They have an easier schedule than Alabama. They have an easier schedule than any team that's in this discussion, period, hands down.
And we have absolutely no idea how Georgia's going to play against Alabama or any other team like Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan State. We have absolutely no idea, because what we're looking at in front of us, the schedule in front of us, states that, wow, this is a pretty weak schedule. Is Georgia really number 1?
But that's the part, that is the best part of the entire thing. If you're these other schools, you want it to be inflated as much as possible, because of the fact that when you go in, I mean, you're not playing a much more difficult schedule than Ohio State by any stretch of the imagination. Not with this.
Well,
Missouri.
plus the team who beats Georgia is going to be looked at as like, wow, that's a good team, because depends on the score too, but if you completely blow out Georgia, what are you going to say? Is that opposing team going to be like the number 1 team and they should have been number 1 this whole time, or you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, they won't be at first.
Yeah,
but here's
I guarantee you look at the offenses of these teams that Georgia has played. Not only were they terrible against Georgia, but I know for a fact, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Florida have had very difficult times on offense with everybody. And this is, I'm really digging into this, and their vaunted defense got the numbers that they got based upon playing horrible teams.
Well, here's what Arkansas got ranked high for. Here's what happened there. Arkansas beat Texas when Texas was ranked, and Texas was ranked like 14th at the time. And then they beat them 40-21. They whipped them, and then they play right afterwards. They played Rice. Arkansas played Rice, Texas, and then GA Southern, and they beat GA Southern.
Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia Southern.
Georgia Southern Eagles.
And then they beat Texas A&M 20-10. Then they got whipped by Georgia 0. The big difference, I think this is the biggest difference, is
Daughtery, Georgia Southern has a conference record of 1-4 and an overall record of 2-6.
Yeah,
they're terrible.
Yeah, so they're not good. But here's the and then the Arkansas did just beat AR Pine Bluff 45. So that was a big win for them. Really showed they're scary. But the thing is here's what I think with Georgia, because I think with Georgia that I think that, okay, you're in the SEC, so they're going to give you the huge credit there. Then the big difference is their defense just played nasty at so many different times. And I think defense is the hardest thing in college football. I think offenses are usually, you're like, okay, their offense is good. But I think the defense, when you have a solid defense like that, the defense is probably the hardest piece to fill. And when they did play, they did dominate some teams. And it made it look even worse and made Georgia even look better because of the fact they just beat the living crap out of Florida at Florida when Alabama struggled. So I think the whole thing about it is, okay, you know that Georgia's offense can score, but the defense, when they do play, they're aggressive. And that's the big thing there. They are aggressive. So they're not really, they're just not, the most points scored against them out of the entire season was 13 points. So,
but look, the competition.
Yeah, for sure. You can argue
that
the competition.
Played against.
Yeah.
They have a good defense.
Mm-hmm.
But the comment that I heard somebody, one of the pontificators on the television was like, this is probably the greatest defense that I've seen since, even better than LSU's the year that they went undefeated and won. And I think that is an absolutely crazy statement when you look at the teams that these guys shut out or kept at low scoring.
Mm-hmm.
They have nowhere have they run the gauntlet like LSU did.
No. And they here's the thing. They got Missouri coming up, cakewalk. Tennessee, we'll see what happens there. If Tennessee gives them a little bit of a blimp, a little blip in their...
Oh, Georgia?
No, Tennessee. Yeah, it gives Georgia a little bit of a, we'll see, because they got to go play at Tennessee. Tennessee really took it to Alabama at Alabama. So there's that. So we'll kind of see that, but I'm not convinced that Tennessee is, I think they're better than what they have been for many years, but I just don't see that being very much. But I do have some questions for you guys here coming up. Now, Tug, I want to go with you first. Michigan being ranked 7th. They lose to Michigan State. Now, this makes sense to me because of the fact if you're going to rank Michigan State 3rd, and Michigan just lost a very tight battle to them. Very tight battle. Obviously, giving them respect there, putting them right behind Cincinnati. Okay. That's above, and I want to talk about Michigan real quick. That is above Oklahoma and right behind Cincinnati. Tug, how do you feel about that, as a whole? I mean, Michigan's schedule was a little bit interesting here, but do you think that was a fair spot for them to put them above Oklahoma?
That's a pretty tough question because Oklahoma has struggled against many teams like West Virginia, beat them by 3 points. Nebraska, it was 23-16. Tulane 40-35. You had WCU probably better than all the teams I mentioned, 76-0. I'm only kidding, but then you look at Michigan's schedule, and they looked better, And if you have the number, what was it at the time? It was Michigan State was 7, I believe, and Michigan was 6, or it was 8 and 6,
something like that.
And Michigan barely lost to Michigan State. So I think you got to give credit where credit's due, because what team has Oklahoma played that's in the top 10?
Yeah. And
none. No team in the top 10. So there's no way you can rank them above Michigan, in my opinion.
I agree.
Are there any light components? Are there any Nebraska? Okay.
The only light component I see is a top 10 team.
No, look at the schedule. They both played Nebraska.
No, I get that. I'm just saying Oklahoma never played a top 10 team. Michigan has.
But even with Nebraska, Oklahoma only beat Nebraska 23-16. Michigan beat Nebraska 32-29. So there's a light component or opponent.
Yeah, and it was a close game for both of them. But here's going on Oklahoma here. Oklahoma, undefeated or not, I think it's hilarious that they put Cincinnati above Oklahoma because Oklahoma's schedule, I think, is tougher than Cincinnati's. I think we can agree with that. Do you guys agree? Tug, you agree?
I do.
Coach, you agree with that statement? Do you think?
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
Well, here's who they played. We'll go through it. Miami of Ohio. Cincinnati played Miami of Ohio, Murray State, Indiana, Notre Dame. Okay, there's your two tough ones. One's not even that tough. Temple, UCF, Tulane, Navy, Tulane, and those two last games they struggled like hell for them. So, I think that's really hilarious.
What was the Tulane score?
The Tulane score was 31-12. Cincinnati, obviously. So
Oklahoma had them at Oklahoma and beat Tulane 40-35.
Yeah, it was not. It just was, but they struggled. Cincinnati didn't do well until the very end. So that score is completely inflated on how the game actually went down. They were struggling up until the end of the game. They were struggling with Tulane, and then Tulane just fell apart. But in everyone in the AP polls, they had Cincinnati at number 2, and we all disagreed with that. And we got some heat on our community tab, and we posted our rankings on it. I just don't see Cincinnati. If I'm making an argument for, obviously, I would say they beat Notre Dame and they beat Indiana, a Big Ten school. Okay, that would be my 4. But then my against outweighs it tremendously. Okay, you played Murray State, great. You played Miami of Ohio, fantastic. Temple, what a nail biter there. UCF, okay, getting a little better. Navy, 1-4 or 1-5 at the time. You barely beat Navy, and then you go and play Tulane at Tulane, and it was a struggle like hell. So 2 1-win teams gave them a run for their money for a good amount of the game, way more than a number 2 team should be having troubles with. And that's my big thing.
What do they play next?
They play Tulsa next.
Oklahoma's got Baylor.
Yep, and then they play South Florida after that. USF for Oklahoma?
No. You just said South Florida. University of South Florida.
Yeah, USF. Yeah, dear Lord. And then after that, they have the SMU game, which SMU just lost. So they're not even ranked
Houston.
now.
Just lost to Houston.
Houston, yeah. Tough school. And then to finish it off, Cincinnati has to go play East Carolina, so ECU. So their schedule, unfortunately for Cincinnati, their schedule does nothing for them, for me. I don't see anything here that's telling me that you ran the gauntlet and you scheduled the toughest schools. I mean, your very last game, too, you scheduled ECU. You didn't do enough for me to really say, hey, look, we're gonna make it tough.
And what's gonna happen between them, if you watch and look and get a feel for them versus Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma's got Baylor, then they have Iowa State, and then they have Oklahoma State.
Well, and Oklahoma
has 3 teams are real football teams.
Yep, they are. Oklahoma State is ranked they're 11th, but I don't think they are in the actual polls of where they're ranked. Oklahoma State is 11th. Yeah, they are. They're right behind Notre Dame. So they do have a tough one. Oklahoma, I think, can really move up above Cincinnati just because of who they have. Oklahoma's playing Baylor, Iowa State and Oklahoma State. Those are ones that it's like, okay, if you beat those guys, like you beat Texas Tech, well, then they're going to probably reward you, and rightfully so. In my opinion,
I see as early as next week. If Oklahoma goes to Baylor and takes care of business with this new quarterback and puts together a good game, the argument to me is over right then and there because Cincinnati's got nobody left to play.
So
and Oklahoma. Go ahead, Tug.
who do you think would win? Tug, who do you think would win out of the two? Cincinnati, Oklahoma. If you had to put your money on it, who do you got?
I have Oklahoma. I think their offense is a lot more powerful, and I don't think Cincinnati's defense is that good. In all honesty,
I agree with you. I'd go Oklahoma. Coach, what do you got?
Same thing. Exactly what he said. Right on the money.
Yep. That's interesting. So right now, as it looks like Alabama can worm their way in, unless they lose to Georgia. I think if they lose to Georgia, there's no way they go in. Do you guys agree with that? If they lose to Georgia, I don't see how they'll squeak them back in.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't.
No.
It would make, unless the wheels came off, and a bunch of other scenarios.
Yeah.
But there's that they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't go in with two losses.
They shouldn't even have been up as high as they are. But I think if Alabama loses, they're out. Then if Michigan runs the table, it's easy. They're in. If they lose to Ohio State, I still think there's a path for Michigan State to get in. I really do. Because I think if Alabama loses, Michigan State's only losses to Ohio State, dear Lord, and then Oregon would move to 2, Ohio State would move to 3, and then Michigan State could move to 4 unless Oklahoma just destroys these upcoming teams like nothing. But if Michigan State loses a close game to Ohio State, I think it could be Georgia. I think it then could be probably Ohio State, then it would be Oregon, and then Michigan State going into the playoffs, which would be crazy to see. That would be absolutely insane. I don't think Cincinnati has a path unless they just get lucky with these other guys.
Here's the scenario. You guys see what you guys think about. Each of you give me a take on this. Georgia beats Alabama. Alabama's out.
Yep.
Michigan State, if they win out, and then they'll be sitting at number 2.
Yep.
Oregon's going to win out. I don't see them losing. They'll be at number 3. And let's say Ohio State, here's the trick, is that would be 7-2 Ohio State. If Ohio State beats Michigan, then that takes both Ohio State and Michigan out of it. And Oklahoma, if they run the table, I think leapfrogs and takes that number 4 spot because Ohio State and Michigan take each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Cincinnati's still sitting there undefeated, but Oklahoma would then be undefeated, beat those ranked teams, leapfrog them,
and get in.
And they would get in because Alabama's out, and they would jump in front of Alabama. And nobody in their right mind is going to rank Cincinnati above a 2-loss Alabama team. There's too many people that just look at the word Alabama and say, "Oh, well, they should be ranked 1. We don't care how they play."
Yeah.
So that scenario, and then so that's one scenario. Tell me what you got to think, and then the other scenario is I flip the Ohio State Michigan story.
Ohio State beats Michigan.
Yeah. So let's stick with the first one. Michigan stays in. Alabama.
Yeah.
Michigan
so Ohio State
all the way.
Loses that game against Michigan State coming up.
Correct.
Okay. So
then they beat Michigan.
They beat
so
Michigan.
They wipe out Michigan.
Yeah, and if Oklahoma, you have several things that can happen. If Cincinnati, I think if Cincinnati, if they beat Michigan, if Michigan State beats Ohio State, and it's a close game, they're going to keep Ohio State somewhat close. They're going to keep them within 8. Now, if Oklahoma's going to have to win out to keep that spot because Oklahoma is pressing to where they're willing to drop Oklahoma lower than this in a bad way, not in a good way. So they'll go down the ranking, or they'll go higher.
No.
They're lower in the ranking, whatever it is. But I think what can happen is, Ohio State could end up still getting in that. I really do believe that because if they beat Michigan,
Oklahoma wins out.
If they win out,
goes to 4.
But what I'm saying, if Oklahoma wins out, I think they would go to 4. If Ohio State loses, for sure, then it would be Georgia, Michigan State, Oregon, and then it would be Oklahoma. But what I'm saying is, if Oklahoma loses, Ohio State could maybe even take one extra loss, to a, I don't know, that would be tough. It's
No,
actually
they'll
weird.
put Alabama in first.
They would, yeah. Alabama would go up. So, yeah, Alabama would wipe them. They would definitely Ohio State's SOL at that point in time. So, yeah, kind of forgetting about that whole Alabama having to play. So, yeah, if Ohio State loses one more, they're done. They're not getting in because they'll throw Alabama in over top of them. And that
Basically,
Oklahoma,
what I'm saying is Alabama goes to 5. The number 4 spot is open.
Yeah, Oklahoma, if they run the table, they're getting in. And Ohio State loses. If Ohio State loses, but here's the other thing.
Beats Michigan.
Yep. They're going in. But here's the other thing. Oklahoma could still get in even if Michigan State loses or Ohio State still wins. Because if Michigan State loses and Ohio State beats them, they could jump up. Ohio State could jump up to 3 at that point.
No, they won't put them ahead of Oregon. Oregon moves up.
But the thing is they beat Michigan State, who's ranked 3.
Yeah, so, but I think they set the table right now.
I get it.
Yeah. One loss team, or Oregon beat Ohio State.
They keep them above. Okay.
I think they keep them above just because the stronger the schedule Ohio State has, the better it is for Oregon.
Yeah.
So I don't see them moving. So
then you see the only reason I really question it is just logic perspective, is that Oregon's won very close games that Ohio State has not really had those close of games. Penn State was really a close game, and then Oregon was their only other one. Aside from that, Ohio State's been just blowing teams out of the water. So Oregon's had some close games. They've almost lost a few times. It was tight. And if Ohio State beats Michigan State, who's ranked 3, my understanding of, just thinking of it logically, I'd be like, well, I would then put Ohio, even though they lost to Oregon. But you know what? I totally respect that. If you're going to put them above, if you're like, look, Ohio State, you lost to them. You got to eat your bread, man. Nothing you could do. Hey, you know what? I respect that. That's hilarious.
Here's how your scenario of that jump happens is if Ohio State makes a run like it did a couple years back and just posted big numbers.
Yeah, huge numbers with Urban Meyer.
Everybody at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Those teams are in this top 7.
Mm-hmm.
They do that.
Then I don't know how you'd put Oregon above them. I just don't see that.
Well, let me finish. So here's what happens is you're sitting with Georgia. Alabama's gone. Mm-hmm. They have to figure out a way that I bet you at that point in time that they're saying our marquee matchup that we wanted for the championship is Ohio State and Georgia.
Yeah.
So they'll set the table intentionally
to put Oregon at 3, Ohio State.
One of them, Oregon at 4, Ohio State in at 3 or 2.
Yeah.
Because both 2 and 3 are gone.
Yeah, Alabama and Michigan State gone. So
then it would be and then they would look at let's say Oklahoma wins out.
Yeah.
They'll bump Oklahoma above Oregon.
Yeah.
And they'll have Oregon play Georgia, and they'll have Oklahoma play
Oregon,
Ohio State.
Oh yeah, flipping that, and that would.
And what about Alabama in this? Well, what if it would be Alabama versus Ohio State in that case?
Well, the question is how does Alabama stay in? You're talking about Alabama beating Georgia? Because I think if Alabama loses to Georgia, they go to 5 at 2-loss team.
Yeah, which they shouldn't even be that high. I don't think if you lost to that,
I don't think they should either.
You got to crush them at that point. Be like, hey, you're behind Oklahoma as far as we're concerned. But what you're saying, Tug, is if they do beat them, then yes. I think that if Alabama beats Georgia, then you could see an Oregon, Ohio State. If Ohio State wins out, then you would see Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, and Ohio State facing off in the playoffs. And then they would.
Yeah, I think they would put Alabama versus Ohio State at that point. Maybe not. Maybe they would intentionally put Ohio State at number 4 to play Georgia. Otherwise, it literally is going to be like 2014 all over again, where Alabama played Ohio State, got destroyed, and then went on to Oregon and beat the Ducks.
Yeah.
So, Tug, for Alabama to be in it, they have to beat Georgia.
Yes, they do.
So, where do those? If that happens, where do they fall? Who's which number?
Well, I think they would keep Alabama at number 2.
But
And
who
they
goes
would
to
keep-
1 if they beat them?
They
I think they would keep Georgia at number 1.
No,
no way.
I disagree.
They would keep. They
Georgia
would
just
bump-
lost.
No, they would put Alabama at 1. Period. Yeah, Alabama would go to 1.
So, Josh or Tug, you're thinking that Georgia, even though they lose to Alabama, they would still stay at 1.
I think it's a possibility. I don't see why they would. One loss. What do you look at then? Strength of schedule or?
Well, no,
how do you
Alabama
go-
just beat them.
Yeah, Alabama just beat them, so they do the same thing with Oregon and Ohio State. They would rank
Okay,
them higher.
Alabama just beat them. They're going to move Alabama ahead of them.
Yeah, so they'd move them above. But then you could have. But here's the other thing too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then do you see a path for Cincinnati to even come close?
No,
Not at all.
like everyone's talking about. The only way for Cincinnati to get there is for other people to lose.
Well, then they have to still dominate, I think, because even here's the problem: they would have to have Michigan. They would have to have like a weird configuration. It would have to be like Michigan State would lose to Ohio State, and then Ohio State would lose to Michigan, but then they would try to throw Michigan in because Michigan's 7th.
Well, here's what comes into play in that is who goes and plays the Big Ten championship game.
I have no idea. Yeah, that it would be. Oof, I don't even know who would go.
I think it's still if
It'd be a weird one.
because it goes into a tiebreaker.
Yeah, and the tiebreaker's what? How many points you scored? It's like
I
points
don't
4,
know if that's
points.
the
Because
first.
if that's the thing, then Ohio State's getting in easy because they've just. I mean, you look at the points.
Oh, they
for
haven't
and
played.
just-
No. It's against the like teams that they're tied with.
Yeah. So then, yeah, that would be.
And we haven't played those games yet, so
Yeah.
we don't know what those scores are.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. But as it sits right now, if Alabama loses, you could have, and if Michigan State loses, or they get in, you could end up having a really weird. You could end up having Ohio State playing Georgia, and then Alabama playing Oregon, and that would almost be like the only difference would be Georgia instead of Florida State is the 2014 playoff game. That'd be crazy as hell experience there. And Ohio State, it's kind of funny about that too, is Ohio State barely got in with Urban Meyer at that time, but they beat Wisconsin so badly that they ended up having to throw them in. But yeah, this is interesting. And then Wake Forest at 9, guys, figuring out. I mean, I don't see anything with Wake Forest. I think that's at 9. I think it's a little bit weird, but the fact that the Wake Forest is undefeated, there is that. But do you see any way Wake Forest can get in? Is there any way for Wake Forest? I mean, people have to lose, obviously, but they have Clemson coming up.
When you're a Demon Deacon, you should get in.
Yeah.
How cool of a name is that?
It is really cool. They beat Florida State. They whipped them 35-14. They beat Virginia 37-17. They beat Louisville 37-34. They beat Syracuse barely 40-37. And then they
basketball tournament.
Yes, and then they came into Army and said, "Hey, let's beat you 70-56." So their defense clearly is weird. They beat Duke 45-7. This team is all over the board. But I mean, they're winning.
Yeah, but
so
that's Duke.
Yeah, it is Duke, but then they play UNC and then NC State and then they play Clemson and Boston College. Not great teams, not terrible teams at the same time. They're not like the worst of the worst, but they're not like, it's just like they're there.
They're a good football team. They're a good football team.
Not great.
And the schedule fell in their favor because FSU, another, not like first time down year, down year. Virginia's been struggling for a number of years. Louisville's a good team.
I almost think, honestly, though, that their
But
schedule is
Syracuse is
actually,
terrible.
I think their schedule was tougher than Cincinnati's. I really do. I see a tougher schedule here than I see in Cincinnati.
Well,
I mean, you got Old Dominion, yeah. Ugh. You got Norfolk State, never
6-2.
seen that school. Yeah, and then you got
They're 2-0 in their conference.
You got
in the
Florida
meek.
State. I think Florida State's probably better than Indiana. And then you have.
Oh,
I mean, they almost beat Notre Dame. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. We're picking at straws at this, but if Wake Forest got in, I'm gonna laugh so freaking hard at the end of this. I'm gonna die laughing because that is gonna be the most common. And watch them win. Watch that. I'm gonna laugh so freaking hard. If Wake Forest walks out as the national champs and we all missed it, I'm gonna laugh so hard. I don't even know what I'd do to myself. I don't even think the fans of Wake Forest would even understand what that means. They'd be so confused. One minute we're losing, we weren't good, and then we got in and we dominated. What?
Florida State's terrible.
Yeah, I mean they're not great, but it's the name.
No.
You're winning the name now at this point. And they got Clemson. Hey, give the hats off to them though. They scheduled Clemson thinking they were going to be tough as hell.
They have to. That's in the same conference.
Oh yeah, true. True.
I mean, it's not that.
I forgot Wake Forest was in there because they're just
never. You look at
good.
how terrible Florida State is, and they lost to Notre Dame by 3 points.
Yeah,
they scored 38 points on Notre Dame, and they're terrible.
Yeah,
they
that was
barely beat Syracuse. Syracuse is terrible.
Well, they lost to JSU, and that game was crazy. That was a crazy game.
You're talking about Jacksonville State.
Yeah, JSU.
No, it's JVST.
No, JSU.
Okay, yeah, JSU. Yeah. Some abbreviations are different. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's JSU.
Jacksonville State
University, yeah. Beat them.
And where is it?
Where
is?
Who knows? Next to water.
It's right not where you may think it is.
Yeah, I don't know. Jacksonville?
Alabama.
What the hell?
Jacksonville State's in Alabama.
Okay, that's a good one. I'm sure people find you guys a lot. Hey,
that game was amazing.
That was.
That kid who
did what he did at the
touchdown.
End. Yeah.
That
phenomenal.
was just an amazing football game.
So I think we got all of our picks here going in. I don't disagree with anything. I don't have anything to add to this. Tug, you got anything to add?
Nope.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think next week's going to be super interesting. Michigan State, boy oh boy, you got a big thing. Big time on your shoulders to come up with a big one here. And you guys, you're no longer little brothers of Michigan because you beat them, and it's funny as hell to see that. But Coach, you got anything to add to this before we wrap it up?
It comes down to this for everybody. The names at the top, the schools at the top, is win and you're in. The only team who doesn't have to win out to be in is Georgia. They can give up one loss and still get in because they're artificially inflated their defense because they've played such weak opponents. But they're the only team that can sit there and take a loss and still get in. Every team behind them
cannot take a loss. Yeah,
cannot afford one loss.
Unless I think Michigan State still has a chance. I think that they could lose to Ohio State.
But here's the problem.
If it's a tight game, they still have a chance.
Who do they lose to? If they lose to Ohio State, they don't go to the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, but I still think that you can get in even without that. Because if you're only a one-loss team,
No, the Big Ten champ, they sit on the sidelines and watch Ohio State. If they beat Michigan, go play for the Big Ten championship. That's the problem. Is if MSU loses, they lose out the chance to go play as the Eastern Conference champions.
Yep.
And play for the Big Ten championship, which I think ultimately hurts them getting in.
I think it could.
How many teams are bunched between 3 6.
I definitely think it could. Well, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe, click the notification bell, make sure to comment down below, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for being here, guys. Coach, appreciate it. Tug,
Peace out.
You work here all the time, so, it is what it is. But anyways, later, guys.
All right, and later, guys.